Hello and welcome to this digital exclusive here on CNN News 18 with me, Aditya Raj. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in United States. He will be, in fact, meeting top global CEOs and, in fact, also addressing the United Nations General Assembly. This comes after a long hiatus wait amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, he will be meeting the first bilateral with President Joe Biden. Apart from that, he will be also addressing the Quad meeting, the all important Quad meeting. To discuss this and also what are the foreign policy challenges before India and the goals ahead, we have a very special guest on this digital exclusive on CNN News 18, Ambassador Syed Akbaruddin, who has been India's voice, India's very eminently known envoy to the United Nations, and also currently Dean at the Kautilya School of Public Policy. Thank you very much, Ambassador Akbaruddin, for joining here on CNN News 18.
Thank you, Aditya. It's always a pleasure to interact with you.
I want to begin by asking you, before we go deeper into issues, about your new book, India versus United Kingdom. In fact, your more important book. I saw that video that you put up on the social media, and it talks about the entire bilateral relationship between India and UK. Of course, I'm very eager to read this, but what does this talk about? That big battle, of 2017. I fondly remember I covered the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, and about that one seat that was very much important at the International Court of Justice. I'm sure you've dwelled into history, the historical ties, etc. But India rising in the multilateral segment and also challenging the might of the Security Council members. Is that right?
You're absolutely right. There always are these hinge points in history that where a country is challenged to move beyond where its initial space in the global order is. And that contest indicated that India was rising up the global order because it was a decision taken late on account of our engagement with the ICJ relating to the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. Initially, we were not too certain whether we should contest or not, and we lost a lot of time in that. Once the Kulbhushan Jadhav case became a national priority, we decided that we need to have a judge also on a permanent basis on the ICJ. And we had only a few months left. But what happens in such occasions is that you then put in more effort than you otherwise would.
Right.
And the world responded to the efforts made by our leadership and by our diplomats. I was only in the trenches there trying to work in a difficult situation, but the outcome indicated that India was willing to take on all comers in a quest to move up the international order. And we were challenged by all the permanent members because they were all on one side, since never before had a permanent member been challenged in such a manner. And therefore, they wanted to protect their rights, which is understandable from their perspective. Our goal was to move to indicate that we were willing to take on anybody and everybody if our interests demanded that. The outcome is there for all to see. So I think that's a hinge point in our foreign policy, in our orientation, that we are ready to assume greater responsibilities. And that's
Well,
why the book is focused on that.
right. Since we are discussing UK, the current turmoil, if I can say so, is something that I want to ask you. And I remember those days when you were the spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs, and perhaps it seems like I'm putting those questions to that witty Syed Akbaruddin of that time. So you've seen the news reports. You've seen how United Kingdom initially said that they will not approve the vaccine Covishield, even though it was developed there, Oxford AstraZeneca Covishield. That's what the name is. Now that they have approved the vaccine, they say that Indians, specifically Indians and perhaps a few other nations, will have to go through the mandatory 10-day quarantine period, even though they are fully vaccinated. Is this justified? Doesn't this reek of really some kind of a discrimination? And do you think that, yes, dialogue will be underway, negotiations will be underway, that's what the UK says, but there needs to be some reciprocal action?
So I entirely agree with you that this position of the United Kingdoms does not make sense to many people. but we saw it coming. You look at what the EU was doing, they had come up with a green pass, which should have been red carded by us even then, because it was again making a distinction based on the place of origin or the place of production of a vaccine. Vaccines today are global public goods. They are not produced in one state or the other. They may be manufactured in some state. Research may have been done somewhere else, and in a third country, certain ingredients may have been bought from. So, to indicate a place of origin of the vaccine is perhaps not correct. That said, look at what the UK has done. It has first, as you said, raised questions about the vaccine, and then when we took it up, they've now come up with a rather strange argument that a process of aggregating is not satisfactory, because ultimately, what is an app? It's a process of aggregating data.
Right.
And I'm surprised that the UK is taking such a stance, because there are many countries in the world whose aggregation is in very difficult circumstances. Look at the United States of America. It
Yes.
does not have a national app as of today. 22 states of the United States of America actually ban the use of apps by their local governments. Only 7 states in the United States of America permit use of these apps. And yet, the UK has not looked at any of those situations for the United States. And for a country like India, where we've gone way beyond what is expected for a country of a billion plus, provided an app which is also being provided as a global public good for all others.
True.
I think the UK has to go back and look at it. Now, what are the options at it? As always happens in diplomacy, the first initial step is understanding of each other. Both the UK and India have excellent diplomats in each other's country. Is Ambassador, both the high commissioners are extremely diligent and well accomplished diplomats. And so we hope they will communicate to each other's capital what it is needed. Now, if that doesn't work, obviously, options of reciprocity are always available.
Right.
That should be explored if initial overtures don't work. We do hope the UK, which wants to have a global strategic relationship with us, does not undermine us in such a manner that it creates problems for bridges between the two countries. After all, who are the people going to UK? Obviously, there are people who want to engage with the UK in business, in education, etc. These are the bridge builders between the two countries, and it's not uh, even strategically or tactically right to try and undermine the efforts of bridge builders.
You make some very significant and important points on this building bridges, but we have to build bridges at the United Nations as well, and that's what I'm coming to. You successfully led the Indian mission at the UN, and now Prime Minister Narendra Modi is just about to, in a few hours from now, address the United Nations General Assembly. We saw remarks of Biden where he said that he doesn't want to indulge in a fresh Cold War era. He wants to, of course, focus on climate change, other important and significant issues, and of course, focus has to be on Quad as well. But on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's speech, as a very senior diplomat, experienced diplomat, what do you think are India's priorities right now, challenges ahead significantly, and what is that India needs to really focus on in the changing geopolitical situation, in the changing world order?
And that's a very interesting question, and one which we need to focus on. So let me
Right.
try and tell you what we should be doing and why the United Nations is increasingly important to us. So, in the first 30 or 40 years of our existence as an independent country, the United Nations was largely a political body. So, yes, there were important issues, but these were largely of a political nature that were coming in. So, they did not impinge on ordinary Indians in such a manner. So, if there were issues of, say, the Suez Crisis in 1956, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, you can the Arab-Israeli War in 1967. These were important global events. However, ordinary Indians were sort of shielded or were not aware of these things, and neither did they impinge on their lifestyles. Look at the issues of today. Terrorism is one factor which impinges on every Indian. Frankly, from a foreign policy perspective, there is no other issue which is impacting on the lives of ordinary Indians that terrorism is or
Right.
has in the last few years. Ordinary people are not interested in what most diplomats are doing, but they certainly are interested in are we doing adequately in responding to terrorism globally? So that's one issue. Look at the other issues. Climate change and environment is again an issue which is impacting on all of us. It's a transboundary issue which is creating problems for everyone. Again, what we do there impacts not only on ordinary people, but what we do impacts on the world. This is a situation where India and what India does is of global importance. It's important to our people, but it's also important to everybody across the globe. So automatically, our salience in these issues has grown multifold, and Prime Minister will be addressing some of these issues. Again, vaccines. We have seen that because of the circumstances in our country, we had stopped export of vaccines as a forced measure. And look what has happened. Only 3% of developing world has been able to vaccinate their populations because India was the factory of the world in terms of vaccines. Yes, our needs were primary, so we held back. Now that we've announced that our needs are gradually easing, the world is looking towards India to supply their needs because without production from India of vaccines, the world will never be able to meet their goals. So, if I give you three big things that we are interested in the world, and the world is interested in our approach, it is countering terrorism, it is health, and it is environment. And in all these three areas, what India does or doesn't do means a lot to the world. And therefore, Prime Minister has an unparalleled opportunity to be listened to be looked at, and everybody will pay attention to these things. So I think it's a very consequential time for our foreign policy that what India does means a lot, not only to Indians, but also means something to the world.
Ambassador Akbaruddin, since you put countering terrorism as a significant issue, not just for India, but for the global and the international community, I want to focus on images, the gory images that have come in from Afghanistan. The world is witness to the crisis that unfolded, and 40 years, 40 days from Taliban's reign really coming in, we saw again images of killings, brutal torture, subjugation, women being harassed, and of course now the significant issue of women education and how the remaining American citizens or Indian nationals, etc., are really going to come out. But do you think that India needs to continue its engagement with the Taliban, knowing well that Taliban, in fact, has been a proxy of Pakistan, the Haqqani network, how the top leadership of the Taliban has actually come from seminaries of Pakistan, and also on the United States. How will it rejig? How will its foreign policy now recalibrate itself in the changing circumstances?
I think you've raised a very, very important question. And this is a question important for India, but also for everybody else. Because what has happened is that a non state actor, which was designated as a terrorist entity and consisting of individuals who were designated individually as terrorists, has captured state power. Now, this is not a normal occurrence in international politics because the flow of history has been to leave this behind and move forward. Now we have an anachronistic actor who was until recently, a month ago or 45 days ago, termed as a global pariah, has captured a state machinery in a state. Now, it's an unparalleled situation in recent times. Obviously, everybody is grappling for it because it's led to a complex situation. On the one hand, everybody's inclination is that, look, we cannot tolerate this sort of an anachronistic behavior. On the other hand, it is resulting in a major humanitarian situation within Afghanistan for the ordinary people of Afghanistan. Now, what sort of an approach should be adopted in such a situation will depend on the country concerned. And for us in India, it's a much more difficult situation for several reasons. One, whatever happens in Afghanistan also impacts on us. This is our direct impact. But also, for 25 years or so, or more than that, for 3 decades, India has been a champion of countering terrorism in global forums. And I remember that time when, as a young diplomat, when we were starting to push the agenda of terrorism, most people would tell us, no, this is a law and order problem. Don't bother about it. You should handle it yourself. Until the rather gory images that came out of all over the world struck a chord. And India, having our public opinion being molded for years on this, it is a difficult choice for us to make today to suddenly look at the harsh realities. Yes, diplomacy ordinarily follows ground realities, and because ground realities have to be calibrated into and taken into account when diplomacy works. But for us, it's a much more difficult choice of a existential manner because of the direct impact, but also because it undermines our fundamental principles of foreign policy. Now, perhaps the best way to do for us is not to jump into a position at this stage because there are some realists who say, let's now engage with the situation as it is there. There are some idealists who say that let's keep off everything. In this battle of idealists versus realists, India needs to be much more calibrated in its approach because we have interest there. The whole expanse of our 2 to 3 billion of effort in development projects there, it's still up in the air. We need to look at it, what suits the people of Afghanistan, in what manner we need to do. The whole issue of a humanitarian catastrophe is staring the global community in its face. Then there is also the counterterrorism issue. So there are no easy solutions for this. Therefore, I would feel that we adopt a much more graded approach in this situation. Neither jump where angels tread to fear, nor take a 180 degrees swing in this. So I would suggest that perhaps we need to work in concert, and that's where the visit to the US is helpful because the US moving out of Afghanistan is what has led to this unexpected situation. And therefore, we need to work with our friends in the US and other friends who have common interests and work in concert. This is not a one country issue. It is not a solution that is amenable to a single country's efforts. We need to work globally and with our friends in this effort.
Pastor Akbaruddin, since you mentioned what India should really do and calibrate its response between idealists and realists, something more pragmatic. But I want to also begin here about United States approach. Where do you think United States really went wrong? Many have questioned the approach of Biden, the entire exit strategy, but many have compared Biden with Trump as well, saying, I don't know if it's correct or not, that Trump wouldn't have done this. My personal opinion is perhaps it would have been the same situation with Trump as well. But where did they exactly go wrong in this Afghanistan exit strategy? And secondly, on Pakistan, you yourself have been very aggressively speaking about Pakistan as terroristan, as mothership of terror, as how Pakistan has funded, aided, and given shelter and safe haven to terror groups like the Haqqani Network, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Toiba, and others. How does US now, realign its ties with Pakistan, because it has seen Pakistan as an ally and still, hesitates from taking any kind of a course of action against Pakistan?
Again, it's a complex situation. So let me try and break it down in some manner. Number one, um, the US, understandably, has spent a lot of treasure and resources and human lives in their efforts in Afghanistan. And it was clear across the board that the US, whichever administration comes to power, would exit. However, what the US perhaps in an establishment framework didn't realize is managed transitions don't work the way you want to manage them. So they had hoped that there would be a calibrated, managed transition of talking to the Taliban, of working with them, of trying to mainstream them. This doesn't work in real life. And that's what happened. So, what they got wrong was to think that as a major country which has such global capabilities, they could manage that transition. And it never happens the way you plan for it. So they got that wrong, and therefore they got their exit strategy wrong. That they were going to exit was known to us. So I think the exit strategy was a unmitigated disaster. They didn't plan for options. They didn't look at it. Military people will study this and come up with their learned and wise outcomes. But it is clear that no power can manage a transition of this nature, because societies are dynamic by nature. So that's where I'd like to leave it. Now, as regards the approach to Pakistan, sometimes challenges throw opportunities. And now that the US is out of Afghanistan, its dependence on Pakistan is to that extent reduced. It will perhaps be able to take a much greater an approach which has greater clarity. The Many US administrations have for decades known what Pakistan was up to. Yet they were working of trying to ride two horses with one saddle. This doesn't work in real life or in diplomacy. And that's where they fell on between the two horses. That said, now that there are no two horses, now that they have no major stakes in Afghanistan, I hope the US will review its entire approach to Pakistan and realize that the problem of much of Afghanistan was in Pakistan. And unless you address the issue of Pakistan, issues of terrorism, issues of global concerns regarding use of violence, growth of anachronistic thinking, proliferation of unsavory elements is not going to go away. So let us hope that now unsaddled from linkages with Pakistan, they will review it in a manner that is befitting of a country which wants to establish global public order, and see where the problems are. And if the problems are in the region of Pakistan rather than elsewhere, they need to address them, because now that their dependence on Pakistan is much less than what it was before.
One last question, Ambassador Akbaruddin, is about the big elephant in the room, and that is China. Everyone has been talking about China's expansionist tendency. We, of all, in the last 1 year, have experienced that in Ladakh, where 20 soldiers died in confrontation with China. China, of course, did not come with a number of casualties. And thereafter, now that we are talking on the eve of the Quad Summit taking place in United States, how important do you think this Quad really is at a time when its non-militaristic nature is being spoken about? And how important will it be in the Indo-Pacific to keep a check on China's rise?
So, the rise of China is certainly one of the biggest issues in global diplomacy in our age. And different people are grappling with it in different ways. One option that we have now done is that not look at it purely in militaristic terms. Military is an important area, but globally, it does not have a attraction if you approach issues purely in militaristic terms. It frightens away other countries because all are not powerful or great or big who can focus on the military aspects. There are other ways to address these things, and that's what is interesting about the Quad initiative. It's a unique initiative which has kept away from the military, but what it is looking at is the world of the future will require global public goods. Those global public goods are which have been provided for years. For example, maritime security. Now, maritime security is a norm that for many years the US provided because they had the capabilities, they had the money, they had the resources. However, they realized that given the challenges they are facing, they need other partners to pitch in also. So, what they've done is, along with India, along with Japan, and with Australia, in this region, they are looking at provision of global public goods working in unison, working in concert. Those are not related only to maritime security. They are related, for example, to health, provision of vaccines. They are related to environment. They are related to resilient global supply chains because in this day and age, there are we have seen with the COVID and the vaccines how important global supply chains are. So, do they have resilient supply chains which will not be disrupted in case or which will not be weaponized by countries? They are also looking at mobility because young will require mobility of various sorts. They are looking at connectivity. So there is a whole net or a mesh of global public goods which will need to be provided if you want further prosperity in your region. And that you have two options. You have one option of a model that China may wish to provide. You have another option of a model that four democracies, which are pluralistic countries, which have diverse societies, are willing to give or provide. It's a battle of ideas rather than a battle on the military sphere. It's also a battle of cross cutting issues which will come to the fore in the next 5, 7, 10, 20 years. So it's a futuristic, progressive approach that is being adopted, and that's why it's a significant one. And it is good that we have been on it since its inception because sometimes rules are formulated and then you become rule takers instead of being rule shapers. In this case, India is on the right side of being at least a rule shaper.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, Ambassador Akbaruddin. It was a very enlightening conversation with you the last 30 minutes. And since you mentioned the battle of ideas and a rule-based order, for all those who are watching us right now, I would strongly recommend you to, in fact, buy your copy of India versus UK from one of the best Indian diplomats with his witty, remarks, who has been known on your television screens. You've seen him, but now read his ideas as well of what India's diplomatic win, India's pragmatic approach, and India's entire situation against the UNSC membership to challenge them and finally prevail really means. Thank you very much again, Ambassador Akbaruddin. And I'll leave you with this snippet, a small video of that book, India versus UK.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you.
Took quite a long time. To be precise, 60 years. India versus UK is my first effort at writing a book. It is a book about India and UK and their diplomatic practices, but it's about much more. It is about a judicial battle on diplomatic turf. It is about India's rise in the multilateral arena. It is also about India challenging the permanent members of the Security Council together and emerging victorious in an unprecedented battle. It is about my own experiences of diplomacy. I hope you will like it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.